As Director Easterly referred to in her opening statement, same thing, the kind of supports in maritime security more broadly. We need victims to reach out to us immediately, because the victim who reaches out to us immediately is the one who's going to supply the information that will enable us not just to be able to share information with them to better mitigate and prevent their attack from becoming worse, but more importantly, in many ways, prevent the attack from metastasizing to other sectors and other businesses. So the first victim that gets contacted, that victim's information is the one that helps us protect all the other organizations and victims that are potentially out there. And so we see all the time, when it's done right, businesses reaching out to their local FBI field office. We're able to be there often within an hour or just a little bit more, sharing technical indicators that they wouldn't have had. The dots get connected. They're better able to prevent that attack from getting worse, but then they're also able to share intelligence, which enables us collectively to then arm other businesses and other ports, let's say in this case, from being victims and getting further left of boom.
Mr. Chair, I would close by noting that we have hyper-optimized these supply chains for efficiency, but we cannot leave resilience behind, including, of course, cyber. Thanks.
Noted.
I yield.
Mr. Auchincloss.
Thank you, Chairman, for today bringing together witnesses with such credibility and commitment to defending our democracy. I appreciate it. This hearing brings to mind my favorite anecdote from the Civil War. It was 1864, and Grant just took command of the Army of the Potomac, and he was surrounded by his senior staff. And they were preparing for their march into Northern Virginia, and they kept on saying, well, Lee's going to do this, and Lee's going to do that, and what if Lee thinks about this? And he snapped, and he said, stop worrying about what General Lee is going to do. Let's make him worry about what we're going to do to them. And I think about that a lot when it comes to cyber, because we have to do all of these things that Mr. Johnson put forward so articulately about making ourselves resilient, but we also have to make them worry about what we're going to do to them. And it strikes me that the best offense we have is not actually the NSA's ability to hit their critical infrastructure, although I know we can do that, and we're in the clear right now, and I'm not going to ask you all the details, but that needs to be there. But actually, the best offense that we have is to turn their domestic populations on those regimes, to allow their own people to debate, to deliberate, to ask themselves whether they like 3-year COVID lockdowns, to whether they like invading another sovereign nation. And Starlink, in the last several years, has proven that it can open up those channels of civic discourse that are so corrosive to authoritarian regimes. This question is for any of you who want to tackle it, but what can we in the U.S. government do to, one, turbocharge our ability to turn on their civic discourse, whether with Starlink or other means, and to, two, to make sure that that decision is U.S. government's decision, not Elon Musk's decision?
I'd like to start, Congressman. I think the key piece that you just talked about is what we've all realized, which is the what we do hasn't changed a lot. The National Security Agency, we do signals intelligence, we do cybersecurity. At U.S. Cyber Command, we do cyberspace operations. It's the how. The how is changing so rapidly. And this is where we have an impact against China. Much in the same way Grant in the Wilderness Campaign decided that we're going to focus on our strengths, not worry about his adversary. That's the same thing we have here. We have our strengths. Our strengths begin with our partnership. Our strengths begin with the fact that we are able to talk with our private sector and be able to understand broadly what is going on. The fact that we are now publishing these type of insights in an unclassified manner, hanging them on our websites, must and will.
But do we have a plan, General? Do we have, and maybe this is for Mr. Coker or Ms. Easterly, but do we have a plan for internet freedom in Iran, in Russia, in China, so that their populations can engage? The Ayatollah is 84 years old. He's got advanced prostate cancer. There's going to be a succession soon. Are we ensuring that the Iranian people have as much of a voice as possible in making their discontent known as that succession planning is happening? Same thing, of course, in China. That's what really keeps Xi Jinping up at night, I believe, is not actually U.S. politics, it's latent Chinese politics.
Well, I'll come at it from the FBI's end. I mean, much of what you're talking about are operations that would take place, in those countries. But that's why when we call out transnational repression by all the governments you listed off, that's so important, because those repressive techniques that you're talking about, they're not just doing them in their home countries, they're exporting it onto U.S. soil. And their victims, their intended victims, are primarily the diaspora of those countries, dissidents and critics here who have the audacity, in their view, to criticize those regimes, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, et cetera. And so when we take action through exercise of the rule of law here to protect those victims and call out that behavior, those families are in contact with their family members back in those countries, which helps create the dynamic you're talking about.
I agree with you, and we've had excellent hearings on transnational repression, and I understand the feedback loops. I would say, though, that we need a whole-of-government strategy for Starlink on steroids for these authoritarian regimes. In my last 30 seconds, Director Wray, I want to compliment you on the work that you've done since October 7th to improve public safety in the United States. I know that's been a focus of yours, and that in December you testified that you saw blinking lights everywhere and that you were especially concerned about Hamas-inspired domestic terrorism. And we know that the Chinese are fomenting that, frankly. Regrettably, the Boston City Council in my home state rejected $13 million of federal terrorism funds that would help in part with cybersecurity, but also terrorism preparation operations. What would be your message for municipalities and localities about the importance of regional preparation to defend against terrorism, both cybersecurity as well as kinetic?
We are, since October 7th, in a heightened threat environment from various forms of terrorist risk. The biggest one is an inspired attack by the conflict in the Middle East, but an attack that's inspiring some individual here in a horribly misguided way to commit an attack. And that risk is more likely to be a lone actor targeting so-called soft targets here in the United States, which is, facilities, houses of worship, schools, places that people every day in America go, including in municipalities like the ones you're talking about. And so to defend the public we all serve, we need to be mindful of that heightened terrorist risk.
Time has expired. Ms. Hinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to our distinguished guests. Thank you so much for appearing before our committee to discuss these blatant threats that the PRC poses, not only to our cybersecurity, but to our national security on many, many levels. And Director Wray, I wrote it down when you gave your opening statement. You talked about, they want to wreak havoc and real-world harm on us, and we need to be ready if and when. And I think it's very clear today from our discussion that it's not if, it's already happening. So our answer is resiliency, it's prevention, and it's accountability. And so I'm pleased to hear about the work that you're doing interagency to counter these threats. And back in September, the chairman and I led a letter to you, Director Wray, as well as to Secretary Austin, requesting that the FBI and Pentagon brief members of this committee specifically on the gate crashers at many of our sensitive facilities, U.S. military bases, critical infrastructure. And it's unacceptable that the PRC was even able to gain access to many of these sensitive sites. They scuba dived around sensitive military equipment. They were able to infiltrate our Army test sites, missile sites, and then, of course, the most egregious example of the spy balloon going across our country. It's a blatant attack on our country to undermine our national security and breach our military and technical innovation. So I appreciate the prompt response to our letter, and I want to ensure that this conversation continues, that our security agencies are prioritizing this at the highest level. So I would be curious what the FBI is doing right now to further secure these critical areas to ensure that we are stopping these threats to the American people before they happen.
So we are tackling it through a combination of investigations, intelligence sharing, and engagement. And to break that down a little bit further, we have in all 56 of our field offices counterintelligence task forces that are FBI-led, but that have representatives serving on them from the relevant military agencies that are in that area, as well as in many cases state and local law enforcement, who are a very important part of giving us sort of additional force multiplier to help counter the threat. And so we've had a number of investigations into different kinds of efforts by actors associated with the PRC to spy on, if you will, or in other ways target our military installations. Intelligence sharing, obviously things that we learned through our investigations, we're able to marshal that and then share that back with our DoD partners so that they can use that to be even savvier about how they defend their installations. And then engagement, we're trying to make sure that the lines of communication are wide open between us and whatever military facility is in that particular area. When I visit an FBI field office, and I've visited all 56 twice, I'm on my third round now, it never fails to inspire me the close relationship that exists between the local FBI field office and the military presence in that state.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are many, many of those partnerships that have been very, very successful in stopping many of these threats, but we can't rest on our laurels, and obviously continuing those conversations is going to be critical, and look forward to maybe further conversations there, perhaps in classified setting, about what more we can be doing. I want to quickly follow up in the remaining time that I have about rip and replace, because that is a huge, huge concern. Recently introduced a bill with many members of this committee, including the chairman and the ranking member, Representative Molinar, to help kind of breach that critical funding gap that exists for rip and replace. But it's certainly concerning when you hear about these routers and all of the different equipment that exists within our telecom. Some of them are very, very small organizations that do not have the resources. So we want to, of course, repurpose some of those COVID funds and put them toward ripping out this Chinese telecom equipment. That is a huge vulnerability. So Director Easterly, this question's for you. Can you address really the importance of a rip and replace program, not just for this level, but maybe do we need to look at expanding it further? And what are the consequences of us not taking action here?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly complex supply chains, as you know. But when it comes down to some basic fundamentals, I think you pointed out around the bill itself, 24,000 pieces of Chinese software in these supply chains. And so it's imperative that we help the owners of some of these less resourced entities to be able to make these important changes to reduce risk. Two things I would add is we co-lead what's called the Information Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force. And so I'm not even sure that they know that there may be capabilities with funding to do that rip and replace. So I think that education there is incredibly important. The other thing that I think we need to be aware of, and of course, the FCC has a covered list with a variety of different Chinese equipment, from Dahua to Huawei to ZTE to Hytera. What we do is we make critical infrastructure aware that that may exist in their systems, so they can also be aware of the threat, either mitigate it or replace it. I think the whole effort is incredibly important, and commend you for the bill.
Yeah, well, certainly we have a lot of vulnerability, and we're working to get, and I realize I'm almost out of time, Mr. Chairman, but we're working to get a true accounting of what vulnerabilities still exist within even government buildings or even leased government buildings. So thank you for all of you appearing before our committee today. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each of our witnesses for leading extraordinary agencies at a time of great turbulence and instability in the world. Our cybersecurity capabilities are perhaps one of our greatest threats and opportunities in the 21st century. We must do more to deter and respond to threats to our systems coming from the hostile actors across the world, including North Korea, Russia, and Iran. And we know the Chinese Communist Party has incredibly sophisticated cyber infrastructure and will become, or has been discussed today, already one of our fiercest competitors on this front. One of our greatest assets, something which the CCP overlooks, is our diversity. As Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Kamala Harris have both said, our diversity is our power. One aspect in which we can and must do so much more is to build and rely on a diverse pool of talent in the field of cybersecurity. I know this is a top priority for the Biden-Harris administration and for all of you as leaders of your respective agencies. So turning to you, Director Coker, I know this topic is something important to you and you have spoken about it before. Can you speak on the administration's broad effort to increase our cyber workforce by sourcing talent from diverse places and the benefit it brings to our ability to combat CCP efforts?
Thank you so much for that question and that important topic. And to me and the administration, diversity is all about achieving positive mission outcomes. That message cannot be misunderstood. It's about positive mission outcomes, and we do that by having the strongest teams possible. I talked to 500,000 open cyber jobs. So whatever we've been doing lately hasn't been working. So what do we need to do to fix that? We have the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy that has its pillar. Two that are most relevant to your question are expanding the federal cyber workforce and then America's writ large. We need to do that by, number one, having people realize the impact to national security. We talked about national service. I think Americans want to serve our nation and need to be clear about cybersecurity is serving our nation. Growing up, about the only national service we had by and large was wearing a uniform, voting, and paying taxes. That's changed today. All those critical infrastructure segments that we have, that's national security. So we need to make sure there's an opportunity to serve our nation in cyber. Number two, it used to be a misnomer that cybersecurity and cyber in general was a technical endeavor. That's not the case. Folks think they have to be STEM. Cybersecurity is about critical thinking. It's about agility. It's about being open-minded. So one need not be an engineer or a scientist to make contributions in cybersecurity. Also want to add that there are communities across the country that aren't exposed to these opportunities. I'm a rural kid from Kansas. I didn't know I could serve until there happened to be a recruiter that came from the Naval Academy. I hadn't even heard of the Naval Academy. You can expand that to cybersecurity. So we need to go places where we haven't gone before. And leaders know that we need to take opportunities for people. There's a level of risk. Need not lower standards at all. But sometimes qualifications that are listed are not valid. People can learn. We find the right people, we develop them, retain them, and we turn them loose. So the administration's perspective is let's find the right people, looking in places we haven't necessarily looked before. And why? Because we need more, better, different people to achieve positive mission outcomes.
Thank you so very much. I now want to turn to another important topic which weighs on all of our minds, and that's the 2024 national election. As we frequently remind everyone, the 2020 presidential election was the safest, most secure election in our nation's history. However, the 2016 election preceding it was scarred by Russian hacking and broad disinformation campaigns, which severely compromised the integrity of the election. Anyone on the panel, if you would be willing to answer the question or address this, in an unclassified setting, is there any evidence at this time the CCP is using artificial intelligence to interfere in the U.S. elections, and how do we ensure this election is free from CCP influence? And I only have 8 seconds, so sorry.
Negative 11 seconds.
Probably defer to my Intel colleagues on whether the CCP is actively using artificial intelligence. But based on the DNI's report in December about the activity in the 2022 midterms, which talked about the aggregate scope and scale of foreign activity and influence and interference being more than we saw in 2018, and specifically Chinese attempts at influence, we should expect it. We should absolutely expect that foreign actors will attempt to influence and that they will interfere. But to be very clear, Americans should have confidence in the integrity of our election infrastructure because of the enormous amount of work that's been done by state and local election officials, by the federal government, by vendors, by the private sector since 2016, since election infrastructure was designated as critical infrastructure. It's that work that should make the American people confident in the security, resilience, and integrity of the American election system.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually share the thoughts of my colleague on the other side, Mr. Auchincloss, about the need to provide technology so that the people that live in repressive regimes like Russia, China, Iran, we actually start a second front without shedding any blood, so that the people inside can actually, they're all seeking freedom, and we need to help them achieve freedom and throw the shackles of this regime. So hopefully we can have that kind of technology to allow them to communicate with themselves, so that can happen. One of the things that happened very interesting, there were hundreds of thousands of people who took to the streets of Cuba back in a couple of years ago in July, and the first thing that the Cuban government did was shut down the internet, identify the leaders, and then took them out. If we can find a technology that allows the people to communicate with themselves, I think we can actually help the cause of freedom around the world. And so, I'll be working with my colleague there to see how we can make that happen. I actually believe that the cyber war that we're conducting right now is a battle, and I think actually the race is really the race to AI. Do you agree with that, Ms. Easterly?
I think AI will play a tremendous role in the battlefield to come, but both on private sector as well.
How important is the accumulation of data in this race to AI?
Well, it's all about data at the end of the day, so
Good.
data is the gold.
So here's where I'm going.
Data is the oil.
Okay, there's 150 million users of TikTok in the United States. How valuable is that data to the CCP?
Enormously valuable.
Okay. So, Mr. Wray, knowing that it is critical for the United States to win the race to AI, and TikTok is a huge source of data, actually in a language that they need, because I believe that the Chinese language is actually a disadvantage and that they need more Western languages in order to win that race. How critical to our security is well, TikTok is providing all this data to the CCP. Do you think that's a security threat to the United States?
I have very significant security concerns about TikTok, and it's a combination of the ability that the Chinese government would have to, if they choose to exercise it, to control the collection of the data, to control the recommendation algorithm, and if they wanted to be able to control and compromise devices. And if you layer AI, as you're saying, right on top of all that, it just amplifies those concerns, because the ability to collect U.S. person data and feed that into their AI engine, it just magnifies the problem. We look at AI as a concern in the wrong hands, but we also know that American AI innovation is the envy of the world, and the Chinese are trying to steal it. So the big concern, of course, is that they will not only steal American data and feed it into their AI engine, but that they'll steal American AI innovation and make their theft even more effective. And all you have to do is look at the Equifax hack from several years ago, where they were able to steal the personally identifiable information from 150 million American people.
Director, I'm running out of time. I need to ask you a question. It's a direct question. It's a tough one, probably. I don't know how you're going to answer it. Would you ban TikTok in the United States? It's a yes or no.
Well, there's a decision-making process that's outside my lane, but let me try to answer it this way. As long as the Chinese government has the ability to control all these aspects of the business, I don't see how you get your way clear to mitigating those concerns.
Fair enough. I also share the concerns of my colleague, Mr. Johnson. Over the past 8 months, I've worked with the Chairman Gallagher and members of the Committee on Homeland Security, led by my Transportation and Maritime Security Subcommittee, to conduct a joint investigation examining cybersecurity and supply chain threats at U.S. maritime ports posed by the People's Republic of China. I anticipate sharing our joint investigative report soon. When I was the mayor of Miami-Dade County, we operate one of the biggest ports, in the United States, and lo and behold, when I look at our cranes, they all had Chinese writing on it. So they all came from China. 80% of the world's cranes are actually manufactured in China. But what's worse, I thought that we were okay with software. Maybe software developed in Western countries was okay operating these cranes, but we also found out that in a lot of instances, the software is shipped to China, stays there for over a year, and then it's installed in China, and we don't know what happens to it in that time. And so operating that software, knowing that that software either reporting back to China or that somehow it can be turned off at any time, think about it. 80% of the world's commerce is controlled by those cranes. So thank you, and I'm way over, so thank you very much for indulging me, Mr. Chairman.
Apparently the lights are also controlled by somebody. Carlos and I climbed up in one of those cranes. I didn't, in Miami. I didn't know that I was afraid of heights until that moment. But